Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagavato samma sambuddho dijana sampanno sugato lapiru anuttaro visaddhammasarati sattvaira manusana buddho bhagavati swakato bhagavata namo samyukiro akayiko edipassiko ovanayo pachatam editano vidyuhiti supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho Ujjupanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho Nyaya bhaktipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho Samici bhaktipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho Yadiganchari purisayukani Amto visabhukara Esa bhagavato sāvaka sangho Ahuneyo pahuneyo dahineyo Anjali karaniyo Anuttaram punyakhetam lokasalati. Okay, have sound? Yes, have sound. Great. All right, so today, third day on the Bhante Sutta, the Honey Cake Discourse, and let's see what happens today, but maybe we'll see if we can finish the discourse for today. The story so far, brief recap. Buddha was visiting his home country in the Sakya Republic, staying in Kapilavatthu, the town where he was brought up. And like many of us, when we would go home for Christmas, then he encountered family drama. And he met Dandapani, who evidently had beef with him. And while we don't know exactly what that beef was, we can infer that it had something to do with the Buddha's relationship with their family members, especially with his stepmother, and perhaps with his wife as well. And it seems that Dandapani had been holding on to this resentment to the Buddha for all of these years. Again, we don't really know how long it had been, but it certainly was several years. Then, after the Buddha spoke about non-conflict to Dandapani, who then left, and the Buddha repeated that to Sangha, and they asked him to give more details. He gave a bit of an expansion on the teaching that he'd given, but not too much of an expansion, and then went into his hut. The mendicants then discussed among themselves and went and asked Mahakachana the same question. And he gave the teaching which we mostly focused on yesterday, which is the really kind of the heart of the sutta as it exists today. Eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sights. The meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. This occurs with respect to sights known by the eye, past, future, and present. And so yesterday we discussed about some of the implications about this and about how holding on to anger and having the perceptions of holding on to anger, perceptions of a person that we might have, then create, in a sense, us as a person who ends up being the victim of our thoughts and our beliefs and our perceptions. And how this is quite insidious. If we're not aware of it, then we can be trapped by the flow of thoughts and perceptions which make us feel like there's nothing that we can do that exists in the past, present, and future. And one of the things that I've found since teaching this sutta on retreat is about how pertinent it is and how really relevant it is for a lot of people's meditation experience, because that's what a lot of people feel like, that we're trapped by our thoughts. We don't know how to get out of them. We don't know what kind of person that we're going to be if we're not thinking like that. And we don't know what we're going to become or what else is possible. And so in a sense, we learn to like our prison a little bit. It's nice, or it can be nice, and it can be comforting. I had a friend in Sydney who was a psych nurse, and he used to look after like teenagers, and they had an inpatient, like a residential place called Rivendell, as it happens. And great minds, I guess. And at Rivendell, there's one kid there who was had a lot of anxiety and so on, and was never able to sleep without having drugs, without having pills to send him to sleep. So anyway, Giles one day said to him, "Oh, look, do you want to try doing some relaxation?" So he didn't call it meditation or anything, just relaxation. And so this kid sort of lying down, and he just sat next to him and then just taught him to be mindful of his breath and just to relax. And this kid fell into this deep sleep. And afterwards, Giles just left him and came back. And afterwards, Giles said, "Oh, how was that?" He said, "It was amazing." He said, "I haven't slept like that for years. It's the first time in years I've been able to get to sleep without having drugs and pills. I feel so good." Giles was like, "Oh, that's nice." So like the next day, Giles said to him, "Oh, that relaxation that we did, do you want to try doing that again?" Thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Oh, not today, maybe sometime." Yeah. Can be too much. Yeah. We can be not ready to let go of our dukkha. And if we're defining ourselves by our dukkha, even when we know we can get out of it, we don't know what it is like to not suffer, and what it is like to not be depressed, what it's like not to be anxious. We know that it's probably going to be good, like we probably would like not to be going through this dukkha, but on the other hand, it's also unknown, and the unknown is also always fearful. So this is one of those things that keep us trapped in our sense of identity of who we are. And in a way, we become addicted to that suffering. And as I mentioned yesterday, I've also taught this at a workshop on addiction. And just the idea that our desires and our behaviors and so on are things that happen to us rather than things that we have agency over. So this is the sutta as we have realized it today. And now we're going to go to the flip side. So usually in the suttas, the way things are structured, you'll usually get like the bad bit first, and then you get the good bit. And so the good bit is like, hey, it's not completely hopeless. So this one time I read a book, we had a book at the monastery, it was like the great thoughts of mankind. I'm like, wow, that's great. I don't know if women have had any great thoughts, but I'm sure that there's a book of their great thoughts as well. But anyway, the great thoughts of mankind. I thought, oh, what if they've got the Buddha? So they had like, I don't know, half a dozen pages with like Paul McCartney, which fair enough, you know. And the Buddha they had like this. And the Buddha they had, there is suffering and there is an origin of suffering. That's it. Like two noble truths, yeah. Which I don't know. I kind of think of it as like it's like a fairly good thought. I don't think it's a great thought, but a fairly good one if you just got the two. But the Buddha would always point to like what is the end of suffering, all right? And so he didn't like to leave us just with how it's all caused. Anyway, here's Mahakachina, of course, not the Buddha as such, but same principle applies. Okay, let us, and let me just say in advance that this passage, like the previous passage, was also tricky to translate. And yeah, so I just hope you just like appreciate the dukkha that I've been through. You know, when I finished my 3 years, I spent 3 years on an island translating suttas. And I was just like just translating every day, all day, every day. And fantastic time. It was great. Towards the end of it, I realized that every word that you translate is like Schrodinger's cat. Every word you translate is like Schrodinger's cat, because every word is a fountain of possible meanings and implications, not just one or two, but can have many different resonances and echoes, and it exists there unknown in its little box. You know Schrodinger's cat, right? We know Schrodinger's cat? No? Yes? No? I don't know. Excellent. Thank you for letting me know. Just like caveat here, there's no cats in this experiment, okay? So don't think there's no cruelty to cats. There's no cats, in fact, at all. Only idea cats, okay? Metaphor cats, no real cats. So Schrodinger had this idea that he was a quantum physicist. He had this idea that matter exists in an ambiguous state between a particle and a wave, and that it only resolves that state when you become aware of it. So if you have, let's say, a box, and in the box you put a cat, and in the box you put a Geiger counter and a little bit of uranium. The uranium is decaying, but the particles in there are neither particles or waves until they are measured by the Geiger counter, at which point a poisonous gas is released that kills the cat. So the cat is neither alive nor dead until you open the box. Something like that. So it's basically the cat exists in a quantum ambiguity until you open the box. It's a way of making vivid some of the highly counterintuitive implications of quantum theory. Anyway, so translation's a bit like that.
A bit like
opening the box. The canary in the coal mines. I'm not sure, a little bit different, because here it's neither alive nor dead, and you don't quite know what it is until you open the box. And then you've only got one meaning, which is what you have to translate it as. And you've killed all those possible meanings. Thousands and thousands of meanings lying dead in your wake as every step that you take forward as a translator. Anyway. Just fishing for a little sympathy here. Okay. When there is the I, when that is the I, sight, and I consciousness, that'd be when there are the I and it is the I. Anyway, sight and I consciousness, it will be possible to discover evidence of contact When there is evidence of contact, it will be possible to discover evidence of feeling. Where there is evidence of feeling, it will be possible to discover evidence of perception. Where there is evidence of perception, it will be possible to discover evidence of thought. Where there is evidence of thought, it will be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. Where there is the where there is the ear, nose, the tongue, the body, where there is the mind, ideas, and mind consciousness, it will be possible to discover evidence of contact. Where there's evidence of contact, it will be possible to discover evidence of feeling. Where there's evidence of feeling, it will be possible to discover evidence of perception. Where there's evidence of perception, it will be possible to discover evidence of thinking. Where there's evidence of thinking, it will be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So another passage, which is probably not entirely clear, and the Pali also is somewhat obscure, and you can look up other translations to find other renderings of that particular passage. But to me, what that is pointing to is like a glimmer of light in the darkness. It will be possible to discover. And so all of these things that are happening are knowable. Yeah? And all of that entire process that we've talked about over the last couple of nights, all of these things are empirical phenomena. That is to say that they are things that happen that we can be aware of and that we can know. They're things that happen directly in our experience, or at the very least, very close to being directly in our experience. And so we can, the fact that we experience them and the fact that we are overwhelmed with them shouldn't be taken as the sign that this is hopeless, right? And this, of course, is how an addict feels, or somebody who's overwhelmed by depression or anxiety, someone who's trapped within the sense of their person as a result of their proliferations that have got out of control and the judgments that those proliferations have given rise to. All of these things exist in our consciousness and we can be aware of them. And this is a message that I'm trying to convey during this retreat as well, a number of times, that when people will be like, well, oh, my mind is thinking a lot. Ah, I'm good. What you mean is you're aware that your mind is thinking a lot. Ah, when your mind is thinking a lot, it will be possible to discover evidence that your mind is thinking a lot. Yeah? When your mind is proliferating, when your mind is full of hate, then it's possible to discover evidence of it. And this is one of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, absolutely fundamental. The Buddha did not teach us things that were inherently unknowable. There's plenty of things that are unknown, plenty of things that might be hard to know, sure, but nothing that can't be known. And this again is an outcome of the epistemological humility that characterizes one strand of Indian philosophical thought. And it goes back to the Nasadya Sutta in the Rig Veda about maybe 300 or 400 years, maybe 400 years before the Buddha, all of these time periods are guessed. And in the Nasadya Sutta, it tells the creation myth and the story of the origin of the universe. And it's one of the first creation myths in Indian writing, in Indian texts. And it talks about how everything began and how everything originated and where everything comes from. And then it says, but what came before all of this? The gods don't know that because they were created later. What came before all this came into being? What came before existence came into being? Only he knows. Only he who sits in the highest heaven and surveys all from above. Only he knows. Or perhaps even he does not know. And that's where it ends. So that's the way I like my creation myths. A bit of wonder, a bit of because you're reaching for something that actually is unknowable. And that idea that there are limits on what can be known is an idea that the Buddha took up and applied it in the same way. And he also said there's no way of knowing what is the ultimate origin of samsara and transmigration and all of this stream of rebirths. No way of knowing what is the ultimate origin of all these things. But we can see origination happening right now. So the Buddha did not ask us to do anything impossible. And he said in one of the suttas, he says, I want you to abandon what is unwholesome. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. But it is possible, so you should do it. I want you to develop what is wholesome. If it were not possible to develop what's wholesome, I wouldn't ask you to do it. But it is possible. So that's why I'm asking you to do it. And as we're meditating, as we're practicing, each moment, each second, each minute, each hour in our practice, we have the chance to do that. And we have the opportunity to let go of what's unwholesome and develop what is wholesome. That is the path. So all of these things that's happening, when we become aware of them, maybe it's painful, maybe it's traumatic, maybe it's overwhelming, maybe we cry, maybe we feel hopeless. But all of these things are knowable. That's the Buddha's promise. All of these things are knowable. And when we know them, they're starting to come to an end. They're starting to unravel. Might take a while. Yeah. There'll be lots of moments of unknowing in the meantime, but any time that we are knowing, that we are aware that this is what we're doing, then at that time we are not creating, we are ending suffering. In Buddhism, we have these two terms that Accayagamino and Apaccayagamino Dhamma, those things leading to accumulation and those things leading to dispersal. So when we act out of ignorance, we act out of unknowing, we are accumulating dukkha. We're building it up. And we've been doing that for a long time. And as soon as we switch on the power of awareness, the power of mindfulness, then we are eroding, dissipating, dispersing. So to me, this passage is very hopeful. Like it's not a passage of like transcendence or realization just yet. Okay? Because it will be possible to discover evidence is not itself like necessarily all that reassuring. I mean, it's like you're talking to a detective and the detective says, well, it will be possible to discover evidence of murder. I mean, it would be better if there weren't murder that you could have evidence of. Right? But given that there is in fact a murder, the fact that there is evidence is better than there not being evidence. Right? So this is where we are at now. Right? We're now Sherlock Holmes, and murder has been committed. We've arrived at the house, and we are reassuring the people there that it will be possible to discover the evidence. And we're looking around, we're thinking, somebody left that curtain open. Look, there's some mud on those shoes. And we're gradually gathering those bits of evidence, which by themselves don't really mean much. Maybe they don't mean anything. But over time, we'll put them together and they'll start to paint a picture. And we'll be able to say who done it. Was it the divorced wife who did it? Was it the estranged son? Was it the neglected butler who did it? No, it was craving who did it. Any questions on this passage before we move on? Oh,
Can it be that multiple murders are dissolving at the same time?
I like the way you think. Yes, there could be multiple murders. Yeah. Craving, hatred, yeah. Desire, fear, jealousy, aversion. Yeah, makes it tricky. Yeah. But even if there are these many different things, there still will be possible to discover the evidence. Yeah.
So when there is a situation where you're stuck, I don't know, and you take all the steps back from the deliberation and judgment, and you contemplate, then you can find the cause
Yeah.
and the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you can't, right? Even if you can't, it is possible to discover it. Yeah. And just sometimes you just need to reassure yourself of that. Like, I've got no idea why I'm feeling like this, you know? It's okay. Sometimes you don't necessarily know that. And sometimes you can actually find the evidence, but even if you can't find it, it will be possible to discover the evidence. Yeah.
Where there is evidence of thought, it will be possible to discover evidence in the separate judgments. Does this mean that thought automatically leads to being set by judgments after a while? Because I think it was mentioned sometime in the previous days that thought by themselves are not bad.
Right, yeah, yeah. I don't think it's talking about a necessary. I understand the point. It's thought. I understand what you're saying. No, that's not the case that necessarily going to lead to, like, thoughts aren't necessarily going to lead to the proliferation and the judgments and so on. But I recognize that the phrasing of the translation does kind of suggest that a bit. So then I'm going to go back and once more revive Schrodinger's cat and just check the Pali and check the exact implications of that. But no, it's definitely not the case that thought is necessarily going to lead to proliferation. Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, that's one of the things that we can do. See, people when they're meditating often think that thought, well, they don't want to thought, they don't want to think. They don't think thinking. They think thinking is bad, so they want to stop thinking. But the problem is that but it's much better to start by managing your thought, right? Thought actually is a neutral capacity, right? Thought is part of a noble eightfold path. You can use it for good or use it to bad. Vitarka is thought that stays on its topic and has a certain direction and a certain purpose. Papancha is when thought just goes off to anything. So as long as your thought, like if you're meditating, the thought, may I be happy, this is a vitarka, this is a thought, and that's a good thought, right? Or even if you're just thinking about that person a little bit, right? Or if you're thinking about the topic or remembering somebody or thinking about the nature of metta, then you may be like moving away from the meditation a little bit, but you're still kind of in the environment of the meditation. So it's still, you know, that's still like a vitarka, which is still wholesome thought, even though it's not 100% focused on the meditation. But then, of course, then you can flip over to unwholesome thoughts, which is less likely to happen in these first three stages of metta that we've been doing, and is more likely to happen when we start doing metta for a disliked person. So then it's much more likely that the thoughts might flip over and become unwholesome. Or they might just proliferate and get completely away from us. So again, this is, I think, it's important when you're meditating to just be kind of mindful of the kind of the spectrum of thoughts and the kind of thoughts and the nature of thoughts that there are, and just kind of appreciate them a bit. Okay, that's what I thought. Sometimes you have beautiful thoughts when you meditate. And there's plenty of times in the suttas when somebody was meditating and they had a thought, and they go to see the Buddha and they said, oh, I was meditating, I had this thought, and the Buddha says, oh yeah, that's a great thought. So it's not like thought itself is necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. Okay. Let us move on. So we're now approaching the final passage where we move from the ambiguity of that passage, which talks about, on the one hand, the fact that those things are present, and on the other hand, that it's possible to discover evidence of them. Now, where there is no I, no sight, and no I consciousness, it will not be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there is no evidence of contact, it will not be possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there's no evidence of feeling, it will not be possible to discover evidence of perception. When there's no evidence of perception, it will not be possible to discover evidence of thinking. When there's no evidence of thinking, it will not be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. When there is no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no ideas, and no mind consciousness, it will not be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there is no evidence of contact, it will not be possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there's no evidence of feeling, it will not be possible to discover evidence of perception. When there's no evidence of perception, it will not be possible to discover evidence of thinking. When there's no evidence of thinking, it will not be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of that brief summary recital given by the Buddha. If you wish, you may go to the Buddha and ask him about this. You should remember it in line with the Buddha's answer. So here, Hakachana now, of course, is talking about, what do you think he's no? I'm not here to give you all the answers. What is he talking about? You tell me.
No.
Yes, you do. Come on. Cessation, right? That's pretty good. That's an idea. Pretty good one. Sorry? Consciousness, in what sense? Okay, fine, consciousness. Okay, anybody else got any other thoughts about what this passage is about? Yeah.
Some 12-step program to become an arahant.
12-step program to become an arahant. Excellent. Yeah, very good.
Yes.
Sorry? Dead? Being dead. Okay, okay. Death. It's talking about death, is it? Yeah.
If you put the jhana and face it where the senses stop, so.
Okay. Okay. So a suggestion that it's about the cessation of different senses happening in the jhana. So when you go into deep meditation, your sense activity stops. So that might be another possible explanation. Anybody else?
No becoming.
Sorry?
No becoming.
No becoming. Okay.
Renunciation, being careful what you living.
Okay, so about renunciation and I guess like sense restraint and so on. So you're not letting that proliferation process begin. Yeah, sure. No, sorry. Nibbana. Which one? Nibbana in this life or Nibbana at the end of life? Nibbana.
This life.
Nibbana in this life. That's describing the experience of somebody who's attained Nibbana in this life, an arahant. Okay? Christian.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe because if you take the eye, the sight, and the eye consciousness, the eye and the sight, you can't really do anything about it because the eye is there and the sights are there.
Right.
So maybe the only thing you can maybe work on, train on, is going to be the eye consciousness. So maybe yes, when you go in very deep meditation, then there is no more consciousness. So
Okay.
in jhana.
So in deep meditation, also there's no consciousness. Okay. Or certainly no sense consciousness. Okay. Happens.
Well, maybe this is about dependent origination,
Okay,
because when we discover the evidence, it has overcome the illusion.
right.
So,
So discovering the evidence is like overcoming delusion. Yeah, so that's a good point, right? Yeah, so the discovering the evidence is the opposite of delusion or ignorance, right? And so how does that make it like dependent origination?
because then we don't have high insight.
Okay,
Because we have high insight, we have number of God or other factors. So if we overcome third factor,
yeah. Okay,
then we don't have high insight.
okay, okay. So it's about the cessation in dependent origination. Okay, great. Anybody else? Christelle?
Yeah, otherwise you can stop after, like you can stop maybe at perception.
Sorry?
Because I'm thinking it may be very difficult to stop the consciousnesses. So,
Oh, right, yeah.
So once there is a perception,
Right.
maybe you can avoid thinking, or you can realize, oh, you're going to think about it, and then you
Right,
stop. Or maybe, yes, yeah, because the feeling you can't do anything about it.
right. So the process of cessation or stopping isn't all or nothing. It can also depend on like the development of your practice, right? So if your practice is, if your meditation is, if you have like to say mindful meditation, ordinary mindful meditation, then you can stop the proliferation. Yeah, but you still might have some thinking. Yeah. And then if your meditation is even better than that, then maybe you can even stop the thinking, and then so you've just got like a perception, but without the mind going into thinking. Yeah? So it's like a gradual cessation and unwinding. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Condition. So what I mean by that is that if you have fears, it will happen to you. So
Right.
it's kind of connected with our the whole having this well divine. So as long as you have it, it will happen. That it will be as well possible to find evidence. And only in the moment that it falls in, so you don't have you don't have I. So you're enlightened and then it fully stops.
Okay. So only when so these things will like contingently stop anytime, right? When you just close your eyes or something like that. But they'll only really stop when you get enlightened. And again, are you talking about like when an arahant gets enlightened in this life, or when an arahant dies at the end of this life?
I'm just trying to interpret it without any
Okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Cognitive bias.
Cognitive bias. Tell us about it.
You direct your ears and eyes towards the thing
Ah.
you do not want to be said. Divert your bias towards the things that you do want to be said by, or that you want to engage with.
Yeah, I mean that's really the kind of the practice of sense restraint. So you can sort of avoid you understand what are the things that are going to create unwholesome conditions, and then you can sort of use your mindfulness to try to avoid those ones and so on. So yeah.
Maybe as simple as you have to keep doing the work.
Okay.
The work to get to the bottom, to the inside.
Okay.
And it looks like it's describing the different level of jhana.
Okay.
And when they reach to a certain level of stillness, we could actually have that momentary experience of losing all five senses. But if you reach to the fourth level of absorption of jhana, then you also lose your mind consciousness.
In fourth jhana, you lose your mind consciousness.
That's what I read somewhere. So you an arahantship can be established.
Okay, just to be clear, no, you don't lose your mind consciousness in fourth jhana or any jhanas. Jhanas are states of mind.
The mind will not extinguish.
Not in jhanas, no.
The arahantship.
Not in arahantship either. An arahant still has a mind.
But what does the extinguishment actually really mean?
That's a good question. Right.
Yes, I was correcting an answer, even next one.
Ah, no way. Thank you. I'm observing the practice of epistemic humility there. Listening, learning, correcting, improving. This is excellent. Sadhu. So, yeah, thank you everyone for those suggestions. And I think like the range of suggestions and the range of thoughts offered so indicate a couple of things. First of all, that I think that it's really important when reading scripture that it speaks to us, right? So we read something and there's something in that scripture that says something to us. It means something that's relevant in some way to us. That's one thing. And of course, because everyone's different, then that's going to mean something different to every person. Yeah? And sometimes it can be quite radically different. So that also is, I think, important. And like in the suttas themselves, this is mentioned a number of times where there's a particular passage, a particular idea, and the monks or someone is maybe arguing about it means this or it means that or whatever, and the Buddha take it to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, yeah, well, it can be mean both of those things, you know. Or sometimes he'll say, no, it's not that, but it is this. So some certain range of meanings can be okay, but doesn't necessarily mean that every range of meaning is okay, right? Because things do actually have a meaning. So this is the flip side of the understanding the relevancy of scripture is to also bear in mind that the scripture that we read does not have to be relevant. Like the scripture, like this is 2,500 years old. This has no moral requirement to be relevant to us. Okay, maybe it's not. Maybe it's completely irrelevant and meaningless to our entire lives, and we could live our lives perfectly well without it. Yeah, maybe. And so when we ask, is this relevant? Then that should be a question rather than an assumption. And always bearing in mind that this has some relevance for the people there at that time. And that's one of the reasons why I spent some time asking about who Dandapani was and kind of figuring out how was this relevant for that person at that time, because it had a specific context. And I've read many analyses of this particular sutta, and I don't think I've read anyone who's actually looked into that particular point. And I think that's kind of quite a striking characterization of the nature of a lot of modern Buddhism and a lot of what we call like early Buddhism. So what I'm teaching here is usually people call this like early Buddhism or early Buddhist texts or something like that. And a lot of the times early Buddhist teachings on early Buddhism are based on like looking and extracting some kind of doctrine from things as if there was like a sort of a correct way of understanding the doctrine that's found in those early texts. But I prefer to look at the text as being a conversation, as being a dialogue. It's about response to a particular time and place. And so to me, that's what makes things really come alive. And it's the abstract meaning of the teachings here is one thing, but then that meaning in the context of a response to Dandapani, to me, gives it like 3 dimensions and makes it a much more fulfilling teaching for me. So whenever reading text, of course, we can't always recover the context. In fact, we can never really fully recover the context. We can only recover fragments of the context, echoes of it, and through unreliable narrators like the commentaries and so on. But at least we should not neglect what context there is. The fact that context is often very thin, means that the context that does exist is especially precious. So this is one of the tasks that I'm doing these days and have been doing for a few years and will be doing for a few years more, is trying to sort of excavate the context of the suttas and try to understand how these things are taught and what they mean as a dialogue and as a response. So when we're reading suttas, it's very natural to think, how is this sutta relevant for me? But better to set that set question aside and ask, first of all, how is it relevant for the people in the sutta? All right, and then try to understand what's going on with them. Then we're in a position to say, well, how might that be relevant for me? What we find, surprisingly enough, is that human beings are kind of pretty similar. And whether they're now or 2,500 years ago, then they share a lot in common. And while obviously there are many differences in terms of time and place and culture and language and beliefs and so on, but the humanity that underlies that is still the same. So when we're looking at this particular sutta, when there is no I, no sight, and no I consciousness, we got a number of kind of answers to that. Cessation, okay. Cessation can happen at a number of different levels. So in Buddhism and the Buddhist commentaries, they make a distinction between basically two. We can break it up in many ways, but the handy distinction is you break up the cessation really two ways. One way is like natural cessation, and then the other is reflective cessation. Okay, or cessation that comes from insight. And the point here is that, let's say you feel anger, and it is normal that that anger will cease. And when that anger has ceased, that's good, right? And you're free of anger. But of course, it's going to come back because it hasn't actually ceased. It's just, well, it has ceased, but it is still ready to come back. And that relates to what we talked before about the underlying tendencies. So the underlying tendencies are still there. That means that when the conditions are right, that anger will re-arise. And then there's the reflective cessation, which is the ending of those underlying tendencies. And so this is one of the fundamental promises of the Buddha's teachings, that these things inside us, which are unwholesome and unskillful, which give rise to suffering, that these things can come to an end and not re-arise again. And that's greed, hate, and delusion. We can make other lists of them and define these kinds of defilements in different ways, but that's the basic idea, is greed, hate, and delusion. So it is possible to end greed, hate, and delusion without them coming back. Just think about that for a minute. Think about what it's like to be angry. Think about what that does to your thoughts, what it does to your speech, what anger does to your body, to your breath. It's not nice. It's not pleasant for you, and it's not pleasant for the people around you. And that hate is a virus. It communicates itself to others, and it means that people will either avoid you, or they'll fight back and resist you, or they'll get infected by your hate and they'll go off and hate themselves. And all of that hate is just like really bad. And when you are under the sway of it, you feel so ashamed and embarrassed and think, why am I, a human being, allowing myself to be consumed by this? And when that hate ends, you feel so good. It's so nice to be free of hate. It feels so wonderful. And in the back of your mind, you know that it's going to come back, or that it can come back. Yeah. Someone says the wrong thing, or you get in the wrong situation, or maybe you just wake up in that mood. That's it. And there it is. So imagine what that's like to have anger go and to know so deeply in your mind that it is never going to come back again. It's just not possible, no matter what happens to you. And the same with greed, the same with hate, so same with delusion, that they're just gone. That's what the Buddha called freedom. Freedom from having to worry about whether these things will ever come back in the future. So now when in the path of Buddhist enlightenment is a path of gradual cessation. And in the responses to the questions, we had a few different aspects of that kind of cessation. So for example, with the I and forms and I consciousness and so on, then there can be certain sites that will give rise to various defilements. So if there's somebody that you hate, for example, and then you're going shopping and you see them, then no, I don't want to see them, I want to avoid them. And so you can get a certain kind of degree of cessation by simply practicing avoidance. Okay? The Buddha didn't recommend avoidance as like a general strategy, but from time to time, a bit of strategic avoidance is fine. So this is kind of one level of cessation where we're not seeing those things that are giving rise to defilements or to suffering in that particular kind of way. But there's still suffering, and there's still the potential for those things to arise. So then we go away and we meditate. And when we meditate, we sit quietly, we close our eyes. And so many things fall away. And even just the experience of meditation, when you come and meditate, come on a retreat, people say, well, it's peaceful. Why is it peaceful? Because so many things have ceased. Only these things are still here. Most things have ceased. And then we close our eyes, even more ceases. And then we meditate. And the deeper we go into our heart, into our meditation, then the more things come to an end. The 5 hindrances come to an end. I haven't talked much about the 5 hindrances on this retreat, but these are the 5 main forces in the mind that obstruct meditation. Let's briefly run down the 5 hindrances. Who can tell me how many are there? 5? Awesome. And what are they? Sorry?
Sensual pleasure.
Sensual pleasure. Next one? Aversion, the will. Doubt. Does that come in that spot there? Sloth and torpor.
Restlessness.
Restlessness and remorse. And doubt. Okay. So these are 5. These are 5 like expressions. So we talked about the anusaya, the underlying tendencies, or greed, hatred, and delusion, which are the roots of the unskillful or the roots of the unwholesome. And then the expression of these in meditation, the 5 primary ways that these expressed in meditation are through these 5 hindrances. So sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. And most of those you will have befriended on this retreat. Yes, we get to know them. Where you are meditating, then it will be possible to discover evidence of these 5 things, pretty much most of the time. Yeah? And they're kind of coming and going. And sometimes you might feel your mind's taken up with desire. Maybe you're having fantasies. Maybe you're having, memories of the past or expectations of the future or whatever it might be. Maybe then you're having ill will. Maybe you're annoyed with something. Maybe you're falling asleep. Yeah, it's very normal. Anytime you're doing a meditation retreat, obviously there's going to be some meditations when you're going to be quite sleepy. Meditating when you're sleepy, I think, is kind of interesting because, like, normally, if you're like, in normal life, if you're sleepy, you go to bed, and it feels quite nice. Like, it's nice to be in bed and be sleepy, but when you're meditating and you're sleepy, it feels awful. It's weird, right? The same feeling, like, and you'd be sitting there and you think, oh, this feels really terrible. And if I just have like a little lie down, it would feel so nice, right? It's just a different posture. So we have to sort of try to learn to distinguish between like physical tiredness and the mental laziness, which is really what sloth and torpor is about. So tiredness is natural. The Buddha got tired, and that's natural, but he wasn't lazy. So sloth and torpor, then restlessness and remorse is restlessness wants to run off to the future, and remorse wants to drag up the past. Yeah, and so these are the sort of winds that are buffeting us around as we are sitting in meditation. Speaking of the winds that are buffeting us around, do you know the story of the 8 worldly winds? Yeah, that one's a Zen story.
Yes.
Do you know the story of the 8 worldly winds? I don't know, should I tell it or not? I don't know if I should tell it. How many people don't know that story? Oh, most people don't know it. Oh, awesome. I think Ajahn Brahm tells the story quite a lot, so I don't want to repeat it. But anyway, so another one of the sets of defilements that we have in Buddhism is the 8 worldly dhammas, or the 8 worldly winds. And these are, anyone want to have a go? Pain and pleasure?
Pain and dishonor or something.
Pain and dishonor or disgrace or obscurity, yeah?
Loss and gain.
Loss and gain, right? So profit and loss, yes. Praise and blame, yeah? And so the Buddha said that these 8 things revolve around the world, and the world revolves around them. And you can see that that's very true. Anyway, so there's a Zen story about these things. And the Zen monk goes to see his teacher, and the teacher gives him this teaching. He says he wants to go to meditate on this island. And I say, I want to practice on this island until I realize the truth. And the teacher says, sadhu, sadhu, it's a wonderful motivation. And he gives him the teaching on the 8 worldly winds. And so he gets in a little boat, and he rows out to the island, and he practices for many years. And I'm sorry, I think am I getting this confused? I might be getting this confused. There's another story. There's another story of the Zen monk who went into the mountain to practice for many years, and he came back, and when he went outside his master's room, he left his shoes and his walking stick, and he bowed to his master and said, Master, I've accomplished that which I practiced for. And the master said, when you were outside the door, did you leave your walking stick to the right or the left of your shoes? And he thinks about it for a minute, bows once more, goes back into the mountain. But no, there's a similar kind of story, but it's a bit different. But anyway, this one, that goes into the mountain, goes into the island, and after practicing for many years, then he became enlightened, or thought he became enlightened, and he wrote a poem and sent it to his master. He said, the 8 worldly winds, they gust and they blow, but the mind of the sage is at peace. Beautiful bit of Dhamma poetry, sends it to his master. His master looks at it, thinks, and writes at the bottom of it just 3 characters. Fart, fart, fart. Folds it up again, sends it back. And his student, waiting to get the message back from his master, with confirmation that he's enlightened, opens up the letter, looks at it. What's my master written to me? Fart, fart, fart. What? Who is this guy? What does he think he can do? I'm the one who's enlightened. He should be. What's he saying? Anyway, so he went and got in his sailboat, crossed the ocean, stormed into the master's room, said to him, "What is this?" And the master said, "So the 8 worldly winds leave you untouched, but 3 little farts will blow you all across the ocean." Anyway, not really, just a bit of a detour there. Anyway, so where were we? 5 hindrances, right? So 5 hindrances: restlessness and remorse. So restlessness is a good one, because restlessness is the one that is making all of those plans for what you're going to do after the retreat is finished. Who's guilty of planning what they're going to do at the end of the retreat? Yes. What do you reckon? We should start like a betting thing. That would actually be very profitable. Like, how many people are actually going to do that? Yeah, that they're going to do, and so we could take money on that. Yeah. I'll set that up tomorrow, maybe. Yeah. So when you're at home before you come to the retreat, then you're thinking, my meditation's been really terrible, I haven't been able to practice, and all of those things. It's remorse. And then when you're thinking, I'm going to go on a retreat, it's going to be great, then that's your restlessness. And then you come onto the retreat, and then you'll be thinking, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. That's your remorse. And then you're planning, when I get off the retreat, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be doing that. I'm definitely going to keep my meditation up. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to be practicing like at least 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. Come on. At least. And okay, maybe 1 hour, in the morning, or maybe not every day. Definitely, I'm going to be practicing meditation. And so you make all of these plans, but of course the problem is that if you're not here when you're here, when are you going to be here? And when you get off retreat, if you're going to be longing, when's the next time I go on retreat? So that I can long to be off the retreat? Then it all gets a bit much, doesn't it? Actually, a retreat is just a retreat. And I know that when we're booking it, we're making arrangements for it and all of those things, it seems like a lot. But actually it's just a few days. And we've just started it, and it'll be over soon. And we'll go back and life will be kind of the same. And you might be different. And everybody else around you is the same. But there's a kind of ambiguity about that as well. Because then the more different that you become on retreat, then often the harder it will be for you to integrate back into your life. Right? I mean, you can't get back home and tell your partner, I just got enlightened. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Right? Changes the dynamic of a relationship. So these things are complicated. Anyway, so restlessness and remorse. And then the next one is doubt. So doubt is unlike some of those hindrances, like some of them are just things that are not really any good anytime, like anger, for example. But then some like doubt is actually suitable. It's actually necessary in many cases. There's plenty of things that we don't know and that we should have doubt about. And if we don't know and we have to find out, then it's good to have doubt about things. And in fact, prematurely ending doubt is often a much bigger hindrance than having doubt. And knowledge is a bigger hindrance to wisdom in many cases than ignorance is. Someone who's ignorant, if they know that they're ignorant, is on a path to wisdom. So doubt isn't about not knowing things. It's not even about not knowing Dhamma, not knowing Buddhism. Because we can always ask. And we can study and we can find those things out. That's not too hard. The antidote to doubt in Buddhism is not faith, but inquiry. So if we have doubts, then we can find out. But the doubt that we're talking about here is specifically the doubt that happens in your meditation. Maybe metta isn't right for me. Maybe I should try this other meditation. Maybe that's good enough. I should stop. Maybe if I just think about that for a little while, then that will be okay. And all of those kinds of things. And especially doubt about like where the practice is going to be leading. And doubt about yourself. And sometimes people think that, oh, look, I have faith in the Buddha, faith in the Buddha's teachings. That's not the problem. I just have doubt in myself. But they're really not different. Because the Buddha said that you can do it. He said that he wouldn't teach the Noble Eightfold Path if it weren't possible to practice it. So you can practice it. And if you can practice the Eightfold Path, then you can get enlightened. And if you doubt yourself, it's not just yourself you're doubting the Buddha, doubting the Buddha's teachings. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about your doubt. It doesn't matter. It's not important. And the Buddha gave a simile of a chook sitting on some eggs. Oh, by the way, do we know what a chook is? No? A chicken? Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm just doing a bit of a survey because I use the word chook in my translations and people were like, that's very Australian. No one's going to know what that is. You have to take it out. And I'm saying, no, I like my chook. Do people know what a chook is? No, really? Oh, I'm definitely going to keep it in that now. So the chook is sitting on 3 eggs, on some eggs. And the Buddha, very simple simile, the Buddha said that if the chook's sitting on the eggs, and if the chook's thinking, I really hope these eggs hatch, or if there's another chicken sitting on the eggs and the chicken goes, whatever, then it doesn't really matter. As long as they keep sitting on the eggs. Yeah. So all of your thoughts about your doubting or whether you can do it or whether you can't do it and so on actually don't really matter as long as you keep practicing. It's just kind of a bit of a waste of time actually. And that of course is the danger, is that it will lead you away, lead you off to stop sitting on the eggs, as it were. So Dharma is something that is very how do I put this? Dharma is something that is very subtle, but also at the same time very simple. Just take one step after the other. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to sort out every detail. We don't have to satisfy everything. But when we see that change in ourselves, when we see the power of cessation and the power of letting go in ourselves, then we can see the power of the Dhamma is confirmed. Okay, so that was a little bit of a detour onto the 5 hindrances, which are the main obstacles in meditation. And we're back to the cessation of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, no mind, ideas, and no mind consciousness. And it was suggested that one of the meanings for this might be in jhana and absorption, where the 5 sense consciousnesses cease. And this is in the first line of the jhana formula. It said, excluded from the senses. Yes, but then we ran up against the idea that here it's talking about that the mind ceases as well. And mind doesn't cease in jhana, like potentially there's an attainment called cessation, but that's very exotic. We're not going to even go there in terms of going up. But generally speaking, in states of samadhi, in states of meditation, the mind doesn't cease. So what does it mean to say the mind and the ideas and mind consciousness ceases? So when Sutta's talking about this, they're talking about the parinibbana, or the final passing away of the Arahant, or the Buddha. So in a way, he got his Corrected answer. Well done. You get the prize later on. You get a chicken. You get a chocolate. And so this is one. So this is again, this teaching of Mahakachana is a very profound teaching, and one of the most challenging teachings of the Buddha is the idea that all of these things that we know and all of these experiences are suffering. And when we let go of greed, hatred, and delusion, that suffering comes to an end. So that happens in two stages. First of all, for what we call an arahant or a perfected one is somebody who becomes fully enlightened in this life. So that's the Buddha is one of the arahants. So he's basically in this respect is the same, but also any of the other enlightened disciples, such as Mahakachana at this time, and many other people who have realized this. And so because they have completely let go of greed, hatred, and delusion, they don't have anything in them that would make them be reborn. Now, this point is often, I think, made of, that's often kind of confused. An arahant in this life is basically like you and I, just like the Buddha was. Nothing actually fundamentally really changes, except they don't have any greed, hate, and delusion. So they still have eyes, they still see things, they still have eye consciousness, they still have all of these things. They don't become drooling idiots just because they got enlightenment. And in fact, their faculties and their thoughts and so on become exceptionally sharp and lucid because they think what they want to think and they don't think what they don't want to think, because their minds are not driven by proliferation. So all of that proliferation and so on that we talked about, all of that would be about the nature of these things, that's all. Actually, everything works pretty much the same way. Right? But they're just not driven by desire and craving and aversion. But then when they die, then these senses and this mind and this consciousness, which are all conditioned process, they come to an end. And because there's no condition to give them rebirth, then no more is reborn again in the future. And that's what we call parinirvana. The ending of suffering. Yeah.
So what was the difference between the normal nirvana and the
Normally, nibbana is divided into two kinds: the nibbana of the defilements, which is the arahant, who has no defilement, but everything else is the same. And then the khanda parinibbana is the final extinction of the aggregates or the six senses. Venerable Sariputta described it as being like a workman's waiting for his wages. He bides his time.
But if we say that, it sounds like Sariputta is kind of impatient. Cannot be impatient.
Well, so what he said, it's biding his time. That's why they don't hurry it.
still empirical.
Well, you can realize that. You can realize it.
Who says who?
Says the Buddha. I really like this portion in the sutta because you get to this portion where everyone's like, okay, finally they're getting a handle on it. Okay, finally, okay, so it makes sense and so on. And then there's this kind of shocked silence at the end, and people are trying to grapple with the consequences of it and trying to. Good, yes. Oh, yeah.
Taking just taking work, saying things to oneself, or
Right.
taking images and sounds or feelings.
Okay.
We should make a difference between those.
Okay. So the question was whether there's a difference internally in thinking in terms of words or thinking in terms of images and sounds and so on, and feelings. Then, I mean, a lot of the time, I think it's a matter of just character and personality. People's minds seem to work in very different ways. Some people's minds work primarily in terms of images, and other people's in terms of words and so on. So, yeah, it's a bit mysterious, right? There's some people who say that they don't really experience in a commentary or in a dialogue. They don't have like words going on in their mind. And other people say that they can't imagine things. So you can't imagine, I say, a pink elephant, and you close your eyes and say, "Can I imagine a pink elephant?" And then some people say, no, they can't imagine a pink elephant. And so people's own inner experience of their consciousness is different. Not entirely clear, I think, to what extent that's a fundamental difference in how people's minds work, or how it's a matter more of perception in terms of how they're seeing things, or what they're emphasizing, and how they're interpreting things. Yeah. Yeah.
Long question. A child, also beautiful, the young child. What is it? How why don't you an old child is prisoners, a prisoner of words, for example? I think feelings, so maybe you can comment on that.
I don't know. I mean, I think words aren't your enemy. Words are your friend. Words convey the Dhamma to us. Words give us wisdom. Words are nice. You only become a prisoner of your friend, of your words, if you want to. If you let yourself become attached to them, let yourself become attached to the ideas. Just keep my eye out for people who haven't asked a question. Yeah. Yes.
They still have a kind of survive thinking about it, have some sense that this is kind of true.
Right. Okay, so Min's asking a question about is like to what extent an arahant's cognition is going to be like truly free of any kind of biases. It's a tricky one because on the one hand you have various kinds of conditioning that are considered to be kind of morally neutral and just sort of part of your conditioning, either conditioning in this lifetime or maybe conditioning from past lifetimes. So, for example, if an arahant likes drinking coffee, for example, then they get enlightened, they'll probably still like drinking coffee, but they just won't be upset if they don't get their coffee. Right? But there's still like a matter of taste. You say, oh, would you like coffee or tea? And they'll say, I'll have a coffee. And so again, I think there's a tendency to somehow think of arahants as somehow like kind of magical beings that are completely unlike us. In fact, they are basically the same, but just without those attachments. Now, that's a fairly neutral example, but what about more potent examples where it can actually be something that causes harm, like some kind of discrimination or bigotry and prejudice? So I would imagine that an arahant would be free of those things. It's also true that those things are interwoven with social conditioning and expectations in ways that aren't always obvious. Yeah, it's perhaps not as clear as one would like it to be, but generally speaking, I would think that because an arahant's free of any greed, hate, and delusion, that they're not going to have any thoughts that are driven by wishing to harm.
Like some people say they are arahant,
Yeah.
and sometimes illusion, like try to like cover them and they think they are arahant. So
Yes.
how do you-
Oh, yeah, for sure. So this idea of like enlightenment and different stages of enlightenment, and also like stages of meditation, like jhanas and various kinds of things like this, these are all rife with overestimation. And around in the world, there's ridiculous amounts of people making all kinds of claims, right? If somebody's posting that they're an arahant on their Facebook page, do not believe them. Okay? And when Ajahn Brahm was in Sri Lanka one time, he met this very old and very respected German monk, Jnana Vimala. And Jnana Vimala said to Ajahn Brahm, never announce your attainments even to yourself. Never announce any attainments you have even to yourself. Because that's where conceit comes from. You start telling yourself that, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I've got this, I've got that, then this is where conceit is going to start to come. So traditionally in Buddhism, like with these kinds of things, is that you would always be very discreet and very indirect about them. So you never go around sort of boasting about it, posting about it, arguing about why you are really a genuine arahant and all of this kind of rubbish. But it would be something that would be shared between you and your teacher in a suitably discreet and dignified manner, and usually, even then, usually referred to in some kind of oblique way. So, you know, you might go to see a teacher and say, oh, I've completed the practice that you asked me to do, or something like that. And so without making any kind of real claims.
Prove that there's a lot of fake arahant in Sri Lanka.
I know, right? Yeah, there's a lot in Sri Lanka, a lot all over the place. Yeah. I'll tell you a story about a monk that I knew who was one of the best former arahants who I ever knew. And he ordained as a monk. And he did a very regular practice. He's a Sri Lankan monk, ordained as a monk. He did a very regular practice of meditating 3 times a day. So he did his practice of meditating 3 times a day. He did that for about 6 months or something, 6 hours each time. So 3 hours a day, 3 times a day, 6 hours each time. Oh yeah, that's quite a lot of meditation. Yeah.
You did sleep.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. And so he kept that practice going until he became an arahant. And then he's like, oh, that's very good. No, I'm an arahant. So he then set up a meditation center and began teaching people. And then after a while, when he was teaching people, he thought, oh, it'd be really good to have some psychic powers. So he went to see another monk who he thought was who could teach psychic powers. He said, "Oh, can you teach me?" And like the way he told me this story, it was very kind of gentle and very down to earth. You know, he said this other monk asked him, you know, do you have any meditation experience? And so I said to him, yes, I'm an arahant. And there's another monk said, oh, okay, that's nice, and then gave him these meditation practices to do, and then he couldn't do any of them. And he realized that he was not only not an arahant, but he was not even a stream enterer and not nothing. So he was very grateful to his teacher for showing him that. And it's hard, you know, not just because he told himself that he was an arahant, but also he told a bunch of other people as well. Or at least they kind of, I don't know if he told them, but people kind of thought that he was, you know, something. So he was very grateful to his teachers, very humble. He went back and went to his meditation center, called all his students together and told them he was closing the center down, told them to all keep up with their practice. And he said, I'm not what I thought I was. And then he went off to keep practicing. And that's where I met him. He came to Thailand to keep practicing. And so that's a true practitioner. Amen.
More related to the beginning of the sutta, but what's the reason or purpose for Buddha or Arahants continue meditating?
Why
Just-
not?
I understand why not, just for having good time.
Why does the Buddha or other arahants keep meditating? Yeah, it's a good point, right? Because at the beginning of the sutta, the Buddha goes off into the forest and just says, "I have a nice meditation." Well, basically two reasons. One, because they like it, and two, because to set an example for future generations. I mean, if you could just go and meditate and just get into deep jhanas any time you felt like it, sure. Yeah.
So on this topic of attainments,
Yes.
I think you have mentioned as well tonight probably the highest frequency word of stage. Is there anything of a meditation map of stages, something like that?
Is there a meditation map of stages? There's lots of them.
That you would trust
That I would trust.
as a spoiler?
Well, I think that the different meditation maps, I mean, these were developed in a lot of detail, especially in the Theravada school, which has all like the different stages of insight and stages of samadhi and so on. It's a lot of detail. Other schools didn't develop it in so much detail, but they all have their own maps and stages and things like that. And look, I think there are things to be learned from all of those, but I would also like not be insisting on them too much, because I think insight is unpredictable and people come by the truth in all kinds of different ways. And there's plenty of examples of that in the suttas as well, and in the lives of the monks and the nuns, that they would get enlightened when they were washing their feet and watching the water drain away into the dirt, and then their mind was freed. So these kinds of things can happen any place and any time. So I wouldn't like, I think it's to learn from those things is good, but I wouldn't like to rigidly insist on it.
And in these maps, our jhanas related.
What do you mean?
So I don't know about the taxonomy of maps, map of maps, but I guess, for instance, you mentioned the word cessation.
Right.
I guess it's one of the stages.
Right.
Is jhana somehow as well a stage related, comparable to cessation or any other?
Okay. So the question about is how does jhanas relate to cessation in meditation maps? But cessation is used in kind of two ways. So one way we can talk about gradual cessation, in which case jhanas are a kind of gradual cessation, because different mental factors are ceasing through the practice of the jhana. But for final cessation or nibbana, then that comes after the practice of jhanas.
It comes after.
After. Yeah.
So jhanas are required.
Yes. Yes. Jhanas are a required stage of the practice because they're part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah.
And how is the metta meditation that we are doing related to that?
How is metta meditation? So metta meditation is one way of, first of all, directly abandoning hatred, which is one of the forces leading to suffering, and also because it leads to development of samadhi, leads to practicing of jhana.
And what is samadhi? Sorry for the question.
Samadhi is jhanas, absorption, deep meditation.
So samadhis are jhanas.
I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow night. Is that okay?
Sure.
You can wait?
Okay.
Okay, very good. Oh,
One basic question. During the meditation, when you close your eyes, do you try to focus in one non-visual point straight ahead? Or do you lower them down?
so the question is, when you're meditating and if you close your eyes, do you focus your eyes at one point? No, just ignore your eyes. Don't bother about where they're focusing. Unless you're doing eye contemplation.
Would it be possible among all the proliferation that there is one food thought and hiding in it? Can we see for sure it's just proliferation and nothing good comes from it? Because it's not clear or because it's
So I'm not quite sure what the question is though.
you know, proliferation.
Yeah,
It's thoughts
yeah,
going
yeah.
here and there. So, but among those many thoughts coming to your mind, would it be possible that there is one thought worth reflecting on or keeping among all the
proliferating thoughts?
Yeah.
I guess so, right? I mean,
how would you
look, generally speaking, once your mind is like started proliferating and it's going all over the place, you're better off to not try to worry too much about whether there's anything in there worth keeping. Just let go of the proliferation. So like I mentioned before, like vitakka or thought is a neutral category, and so it's quite normal, quite common that you might have like an insightful thought or a beautiful thought or something that's going to happen during your meditation. But then that will happen from a place of relative quiet, not from that proliferation. So don't worry about having to like filter through all the proliferation. No, don't worry, that's just more proliferation. Just let it go. Yeah. We'll go in and Pekka and then we'll finish off.
Could you explain to me what desire
Okay. Specifically?
is? That sensation or is it all? Because I would like to stop wanting. That's wanting itself.
Sure. That's okay. Okay, so a little bit about desire. So normally, the way sense desire works is you desire something, but the thing you desire is impermanent and hence inherently unsatisfactory. So the desire to have more is then built into it. And that's how you get capitalism. Because you get more and more and more. And once you begin to be able to satisfy people's desires more and more, then you can have more and more, sell more and more, make more and more money. And everybody's happy and nothing bad ever happens. So that's desire until something bad does happen, which is usually very quickly. So the difference in Buddhism, yes, you have desire to practice and you want to realize Nibbana. and you want to realize jhanas, and you want to do all of these things. The difference is that these things are actually satisfactory. So when you go to those things, you're like, and it doesn't give rise to more desires. So this was given, this question was raised in the suttas, and Venerable gave the similes of, like, if you want to walk to the park, and then you go out for a walk down to the park, and you have a desire to get to the park, but then when you get to the park, then you no longer have a desire to get to the park, because you're already there. So don't worry about having a desire to practice Dhamma. This is a good desire, because it's not giving rise to more and more desire. You're pushing it, but go on.
Because with desire, how would you put it in your new mode? Like, for example, I have no business, and that is capitalism, and I feel like I'm not, like my heart doesn't belong to capitalism, but I need more money.
Can I ask what's your business? You're in a bakery. Oh, that's awesome. Hard work, right? I know quite a few bakers. Yeah, who are Buddhists. You know who was a baker? Ayasapanya. She's the abbot of Dhammasara Monastery. Yeah, so she ran a bakery when I knew her in Ipoh. And she would, running a bakery is hard work, right? But you can run a bakery and still keep your practice up. Could you manage to do that? That's the plan. So Ayasapanya managed to do it. She would get up. Now I'm just trying to remember her. She told me her daily schedule one time. She would get up, I think, at like 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock to do the work of the bakery and cooking and things like that. And then she would, at 9 o'clock, then opening up the business and then cooking. She would cook food to bring to offer to me with her sisters every day. So she'd do that in the morning and then come to the monastery and offer dana, and then go back and then work. And then after the work was, then they would go to and meditate for an hour in the cave where I was living. And then she'd go back to work, finish work for the day, and then do deliveries until about 9 o'clock at night. And then she'd get home and cook dinner for her father until about 10 or something. And then she would sit meditation for about 3 or 4 hours before getting a bit of sleep. Yeah. I know. Yeah. So anyway, so then she became a nun. So that was probably for the best. So she was a very extraordinary woman, a very, very, very determined, very energetic. Yeah. So anyway, but being a baker is right livelihood. So this is good. But who doesn't feel happy when you're walking into a bakery? Right? Nice. It's fresh smells and the lovely everything. So it's good. And you bring happiness and joy to people. And it's nice. And people buy some bread, or they buy cake, or buy a croissant, and they take it to their family, and it's nice. But being a baker is a good livelihood. You're feeding people and bringing happiness and joy to people's lives. So I don't think of it as being something that's antithetical to the Dhamma. That's how you can do your meditation. Yeah, you can think, we baked so many loaves of bread, so many of this, so many of that, and made so many people happy. And when you come home at night, you can just think, we made so many people happy by doing those things. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And just remember how good that was. Rebecca.
Yes, you shared with us the importance of creativity.
Yeah.
Not only wisdom, but also hope.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate the creative thinking, imagination, and direct thinking with creative creation of goals?
Creativity is constructive. purposeful. Yeah, liberation is wasteful.
And some people say mind wandering is important for art.
Right?
And sometimes you don't have to have a purpose.
Right.
Your mind wander.
Sure.
Like what you shared, sometimes idea just emerge, most times it's back to the creative.
Yeah.
So creative process is a very divergent and convergent process. So
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I'd say about that is I think if people say, oh, mind wandering is important for creativity, I think they're kind of missing the point and they're not really understanding how that works. What's actually happening is that you're in some kind of non-rational state. The fact that your mind is wandering in that state is incidental to what's actually going on, and in fact is not very helpful. So creativity arises from some non-rational state, which might be daydreaming, might be actual dreaming, or it might simply be, just being in some emotional condition, or even better, in meditation, where your mind is still. And it's because the mind is free from being in a rational state of mind that's what lets that intuitive realization come through, which can be creativity of any kind. And, I'm sure that this has happened for probably most of the people, or many of the people on the retreat. It might be a thought, it might be an idea, it might be a plan, what I'm going to do when I get back, or it might be, I'm going to get a new haircut, or it might be anything that comes up. I have my friend, I mentioned before, my friend Giles, but his dad, he taught his dad meditation, and then he asked his dad, how's your meditation going? He said, oh, it's great. He says, oh, how often do you meditate? He says, like, usually every time I do the crossword. He said, what do you mean? He said, oh, it's really helpful to getting the crossword answers when I get stuck. I just go and meditate for a few minutes and then the answer to the crossword comes. Yeah? And that's exactly the right way to do meditation. That's exactly what the Buddha said. When you meditate, your mind becomes peaceful and you see things as they really are. He wasn't thinking exactly of crossword answers as such, right? But it's the same basic idea. Yeah. So it's not the mind wandering which is actually causing creativity, but it's the mind being in a lucid but not rational state of mind, that's the ideal.
I assume meditation is not the best timing for creativity.
Absolutely, it is.
It is.
Yeah, that's where you're going to have the best ideas.
Then you, just like what you shared, when you choose to sleep.
Yeah.
Or choose meditate, you need to be aware of the posture.
Yeah.
Differences.
Yeah.
If you someone build habits of always come up with creative ideas during meditation, then perhaps the mind is actually addicted to thinking.
No, don't worry about it. When you have an idea in your meditation, you don't if you have an idea to write for something you're going to write, you don't sit there and then plan out the rest of your novel in your meditation, right? You put a pin in it. You say, oh, that's a good idea. I'll get back to that. And then you keep going with your meditation. And because your mind is clear, then at the end of the meditation, you'll remember, oh, yeah, that was the idea. And then you'll be able to build on it. Yeah. Okay. Are there any online? No, good. Hey, onliners, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Funny little people, aren't they? Online people. They live in these little squares. It's so cute. Okay. So let's wrap up for this evening. Thanks everybody for your presence. Thanks for your attention, and thank you for joining with me through our journey through the Madhupindika Sutta, the Honey Cake Discourse. And I hope that that's been entertaining and elucidating for you. And I hope that it has answered some questions and left you with a bunch more questions. And I hope that you're probably thinking that I get a bit of that, but maybe some, and then maybe not, and then maybe that's great. Then you've got another, you can keep on coming back and learning more and more. and just think about it in the suttas, and there are so many suttas with so many great things, so much wisdom that we can learn from, that it's really just this inexhaustible thing. And I honestly feel like, for myself, like whenever I come back and I'm looking at the suttas, I'm always finding new things and, you know, refining and questioning. And I feel like there's so much wisdom there that is just such a beautiful resource for us to be able to use. Okay, so let's finish up by paying respects to the Triple Gem. I want to correct myself. I just misphrased myself. I said this is a beautiful resource to use. I didn't like that phrase. It's an inexhaustible well to drink from. Thank you. Sorry, everybody. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavatam Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Namassami Supatipano Bhagavato Sangha Sangho Sangha